big drive, because out of the Internet of Things will come the requirement or the need for there to be data centers that are continuously running. To team members, have I left anything out? No? Cool. Thank you. No.
From a warranty perspective, I think we had ourselves as an organization. I'll speak on behalf of Tendo Electronics because that's the organization that we represent. We had said most of the time people fight about warranty issues, but what we are advocating as an organization is to say the warranty initiative is a customer issue. When we have done the installation and everything and commissioning has been done, the customer can choose whoever they want to use for service provisions. What separates service providers from one another is the service experience and the customer experience and the response time that you then offer, not the warranty.
Yeah, any reactions before the next group that's on the same subject comes up? You need more clarity on what?
There are two issues on support contracts and warranty. There are two different things. When I purchase equipment from you, there is a certain period within which, if it fails, you will attend to that by way of repairing. And I expect the same response time, which you are talking about. And then there's a support contract that is what we enter into between the vendor and ourselves to then provide the support going forward. But there's normally a 12 months warranty period where I should not be expected to forward. Because during the support period, you want me to pay it. So this is where we are saying, in terms of standard, any equipment, electronic that is delivered must be supported irrespective of without payment.
That's very true.
Yes. So I'm not too sure what you're talking about, the response and service, the responsiveness, customer experience, and so on. That is given. We expect it during the warranty period and post-warranty period.
Okay, maybe let me clarify, Phil, on that. When you buy some equipment or when we sell you some equipment, maybe it comes with 1 year or 2 years warranty. What we're saying is, while it's still within the warranty period, if you decide that Tendo is giving you a role, we cannot hold on to you and say the warranty will be void if you use anyone else. The warranty will still be covered because from where we look out from is the Schneider Electric. We represent Schneider. So even if you write to Schneider and say Tendo is giving us a road deal and we want to use anyone else, the warranty will still be upheld.
Okay, maybe let me try and clarity. What he's trying to say is, depending on the service provider, service providers would tell you that when I sell you equipment, during the warranty period, it's only me who should have access to that equipment. If anyone else touches that equipment, then the warranty is void. But in our case, it's not like that. So once we commission equipment, and you are not happy with the service, the warranty is between the local representative and the end user, but the warranty is between the manufacturer and the end user, because the warranty is an assurance that the equipment that has come out of the factory, if it does not perform according to specification within the period, it should go back to the factory and you get.
You know what? Nintendo, I would not be presenting. You are actually telling me that I can go elsewhere. You may not be good enough after all. So that's not acceptable. Because first of all, you are the person, you are the agent that came to deploy the equipment. So why should you tell me that I have an option to go somewhere? In Zimbabwe, for example, we are talking about specifically about 10. Yes, in a market where players, they will do that. Because for you to come, it's a cost to you to come and do the maintenance or whatever problem has come up. For you to say that you are free to go somewhere, but during the bidding process for a contract, you didn't say you can go to another supplier to come and install it.
No, that's an assurance to you that we will provide excellent service. In the event that you do not get that service, we are saying, we are explaining the warranty module so that we bring clarity, because in most cases, people who are not manufacturers but who are agents tend to hold the customers at ransom and indicate that if it's not me who touches that equipment, then the warranty is for it, which is not the case.
Sorry, I was just being mischievous here, but I was just taking to it that they are boasting that they provide the best service. That's how I taken it, a different view. Thanks.
Okay, so it was more of a comment. Can we have the second group that, yeah, you've got something to say? Yeah, sure.
It's just a comment.
Okay.
Would they want to be saying that to their customers, or would be customers in here, that you can if you want to get maybe backup services from, should they fail to provide backup services? I thought it was a selling point or unique value proposition to say, guys, once we have you on board, be rest assured you're 100% serviced.
Okay, now the customers are speaking, potential customers, yes.
I think the problem is it emanates from the point that Tendo is the only representative. Even if they say you can go somewhere else, even if you write to Schneider, they will go to Tendo because they are the representative. So I think if that space is not opened up, I know it's a bit, we had our own discussions with Schneider around them opening up maybe more players so that at least the playing field is a bit better. It's like, let's say in the whole telco environment, you only have one operator. You are at their mercy. So I think that's the situation at the moment that we are experiencing with Tendo.
Okay. Okay, I'm sure the team from Tendo has taken note of your consternation. And they'll be guided accordingly in terms of how they frame these things in future. Can we get the next group that also looked at? Oh, okay. There we get the representative.
Good evening. Okay, I'm representing Group 2. My name is Alex Mawere. We focused on topic, the future requirements of DC-hungry organizations. Some of the issues have already been highlighted by the first group, but I'll just focus on those that I feel they left out. The first requirement is a review of policies and regulations by the authorities, especially when we consider cloud strategy. I'm just a messenger, so please don't shoot me. The next one, we agreed that there is a requirement for high-speed connectivity. The third one, we said we also need redundancy and disaster recovery. Then skills set, it's another requirement. Then data center certification, it's another critical requirement for these organizations. Then security, more and more security is also required. Then the next one is they would require short time to market for their products. And then they also require to build efficiencies in their processes using the data centers. And the last one is to do with the bottom line. The organizations would want to increase their bottom line through savings in terms of CapEx, OpEx, human resources costs. So those are the requirements that we highlighted. Thank you.
Do we have anything to add, subtract? Okay, there's a hand at the back.
Okay, thank you. For this one, I need to stand. It might not be directed to you, it's a bit wild, but the future is now. So we are talking about the future, but the future starts now. The second after I say the future, it's now the future. We are talking about sharing, which is a very good thing. I would want to know, why is it that government entities, or maybe let me just say telecoms, they are not willing to share infrastructure? That's the future, but I think for the past 2 years we are talking about the future. Why are we not sharing infrastructure? We have telecoms and we have other government institutions.
Okay. Hands there, hands at that side. In fact, okay.
Maybe while the mic is coming to the next person, maybe I can say something on that one. I believe sharing is already happening. Maybe it depends on the terms that people want the sharing to be done, but there is so much sharing already which is underway. In fact, it has been there all along. It's not a new thing.
It's sharing undercover. Okay, yes. Apparently sharing has been there all along. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Just to add to what Mr. Mawere was saying, that sharing has already been in place. But I think the thing that people have to put into consideration is that infrastructure is also a source of competitive advantage. So there's no way that I'm going to share 100% of my competitive advantage with you. Simple.
Okay. So we're going to share, but not that much.
Yeah, so just to add on the sharing position, there's a lot of sharing that has been happening in the industry, and is also through the Universal Services Fund, actually rolling out a program that is also going to enhance sharing within the telecom space. So I think it's a perception that we will continue to attend to. But yeah, sharing is happening as we speak.
Okay, there's a hand at the back. Mark, you had your hand up. Okay.
Yeah, there are basically maybe two levels of sharing that any telecoms company can pursue. Is the passive infrastructure, where you look at maybe your towers and active equipment. So in as far as passive infrastructure is concerned, sharing is happening, where you simply agree on the commercials and you can share the infrastructure. But in terms of active equipment, I'm sure more has to be done around that area.
Yes, Mark.
Thank you. I just want to buttress his point. It's my own view, actually. I've spent $100 on my infrastructure. This guy has spent $10. He wants to use my infrastructure so that he makes more money than me. It doesn't make sense.
Yes, there's an end.
Can I add on to something?
Yeah, just.
So he spent his $100 and he spent 10. What if he was to pay you 50 on to use yours? But that's what the sharing is, right? So you've built your infrastructure for $100. You can now make money off your $100 if you charge him money to use your infrastructure.
I don't know the model of sharing. Do they pay?
Yes.
Okay.
You basically have to agree on how much you're going to pay to use someone else's infrastructure.
In that case, I withdraw my statement.
Okay.
I wasn't aware of the paying part.
Okay, yes.
I wanted to say also one of the challenges that probably the sharing would be, for example, company A shares infrastructure with company B, and company B is responsible for maintaining that site. If, for example, they are not maintaining availability, or take, for example, a generator or the passive that they're saying is being shared, and it's the responsibility of company B to fuel that generator. Suppose they don't fuel that generator, it's the customers for company B that suffer. It puts pressure also on A to then invest in its separate generator, which it will maintain. So those are some of the challenges in terms of the agreements, the penalties. So in a way, it's just a commercial issue. But if the conditions are favorable, like other team members have been saying, where people adhere to the SLAs, sharing has been, it's actually the way to go, because you don't have to invest in that. What you simply have to do is to pay the rentals or the monies that you'll have agreed. But where the person or where the company that you are renting infrastructure or paying is not, you might be forced to say, let me invest independently, so that, because at the end of the day, you've got your customers. It's the image that you want to protect, it's the service that you want to give to your customers, so that the customers pay for that.
Okay.
There's a hand at the back, and then Ms. Duncan.
Yeah, so I wanted to say, I don't know what, we have had a certain forum in other areas, especially in terms of banking, where we're also thinking of having one service provider, or maybe an independent provider like government or Reserve Bank, setting up a center whereby all can go. Is it time we probably need to have the government probably, or maybe to pull up all the players and say, when you are constructing, for example, an area for a base station, we pull up our resources together through maybe the government or whatever. Then at least we know everyone is going to participate, because the truth is we can say sharing is happening, but I think it's 5% of what can be shared. If you guys lead by example, it becomes much easier for the customers, for the other customers, the consumers, to really have a buy-in. We'll wait for you guys to share. We will not, but at least you have to also set up some good SLAs between yourselves and start sharing.
Ms. Duncan.
Thank you. To bring some bit of clarity, for the ICT sector, particularly the communication service providers, we have a statutory instrument 137 of 2016, which was promulgated specifically to provide policy guidelines and framework for infrastructure sharing. So we have in place that policy. The sharing of infrastructure and its objectives, like everyone else has said, is to ensure that the cost of providing services to the consumer is reduced and ultimately lower the cost of such services, and therefore ensuring that there is digital inclusion, there is all bridging the gap, digital gap, as you have as we all know. So the terms of of engagement in terms of infrastructure sharing is commercial. And parties in the sector have been asked to engage and come out with some commercial arrangement. And if there is some kind of not agreement, the regulator is there to then preside over that. So I must say that there is, to some degree, infrastructure sharing that's happening. But like the colleague from Medbank, there is bigger room to share even more. But there are concerns, like you have heard simmering about competitive advantage and so on. These are the sort of stories that the policymaker is not interested to hear, because you can recoup your investment out of the commercial agreements that we have. If SLAs are not working, the regulator is there to oversee the issues of quality of service as a regulator in that space. But without having to name names here, but I think there is a bit of concern within the MNOs in terms of sharing even passive infrastructure. There is active in terms of, I know there are technical issues around that, and also backhaul is something that we are working quite happily with the others that are in the space. So the new deployments, I'm happy that the colleague did talk about. The policy says, if you want to put a new base station and you are operator A, you need to take into account the requirements of operator B, C, D, and build the structure with the strength and capabilities to carry everyone else on board. Outside the Universal Services Fund, the infrastructure that's being rolled out, the operators themselves have been directed or instructed to cooperate in the implementation of that policy. But unfortunately, I think there is not a full embracing. We are not fully embracing that. Some of them challenged it. It's not happening. So the long story short, yes, we need a common position on infrastructure. In other economies, you have an independent operator, for example, for towers and so on and so on. But we had already built this infrastructure. This is what is there now. I think there is more room for improvement, in my view.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nkala.
Yeah.
We're going to move on to the next group's presentation. Oh, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, mainly it was the point on the infrastructure sharing. I think on the passive side, there's an excellent way of sharing, but I think I want to take you back to the vendor side, because some of the equipment, like on the active side, you find that there are vendors who have this proprietary mentality, and the interoperability part needs to be looked at by the regulator also, so that in the structuring of the framework itself, it has to encompass all those areas. So that part is the one I wanted also to bring out. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Initially, you're burning. Okay, this is the last contribution, then we go to the next group.
In as much as we talk of the telecom or ICT sector, maybe this the guys in the financial services sector, when are you going to share also your infrastructure and your systems? As you know, there are just maybe 17 banks, and there are less than 4 core banking applications that are used by these 17 banks. So there's a lot of duplication, paying of licenses to the same vendors. So these vendors are making money, and then this is leading to high costs to us, the consumers. So I would like a situation where you share your core banking systems and also the DC facilities. So are you working on something towards that line?
I don't know. It looks like the banking people are just sinking lower in their chairs.
Our colleagues, we have other colleagues from FBC. And, yeah.
From the banking sector perspective, we do not have a pyramid mentality like other sectors. I won't mention. but it's okay. Group 1's presentation, I think they mentioned that the moment Potras enters into the issue of sharing, we are done with the what? With the rules and laws of the what? Of the country. Then from the banking sector, the moment RBZ enters, we are done again with that. So the initiative is on the part of RBZ. Yes, there's growing competition there. So I think the moment RBZ propagates something to do with what? A common data center where we can share, I think everything will kickstart.
Yeah, thank you. There is an association called BAZ, Bankers Association of Zimbabwe. Initially, that was only for the MDs, for the banks. But what now is the CTOs or the CIOs for the banking sector, they are also engaging. So there is some development, positive developments, where the CTOs will be sharing the challenges and obviously coming up with the possible solutions agreeable to the regulator. So definitely we'll also contribute to them so that they consider a sharing of infrastructure and core banking system. It's something that is feasible. And you also realize some savings in terms of forex and the reduction in terms of capex and opex actually.
Hi. Maybe before I present, I can take an opportunity to quickly respond to the bankers. If the bankers are going to be told by RBZ that they need to give people interest on their money, they will share the infrastructure. But at the moment, they don't feel it. That's the reason they will not push for infrastructure sharing. Our topic is managing energy shortages cost effectively. And we had a couple of points. I think we have about 7, 8 points that we are going to discuss quickly. The first point is around cooling, the planning and the design of the data center from a cooling perspective. That's around power planning. What we have seen is that long back you can have data centers which cool the entire, you have cooling system which cool the entire data center, which I think is not quite necessary. You can have sections where you have got your cold air and your hot air or your normal air, and the data center functions well. The second point is around skills set. Generally, when data centers are designed, IT personnel wanted to take a leading role. But now you also want power experts, you want some engineering expertise in that whole equation. So the skill set will also contribute immensely towards managing energy effectively. The third point is around the virtualization of the environment. If you have got individual, possibly servers, it is scattered in the data center or in what generically others will call a server room, there will be a lot of energy wastages along the way, because one, if you can visualize the whole environment and the power requirements, you can drastically reduce them. The next point is around controlled lighting. In a data center, most of the time people ordinarily don't work from the data center. So the lights should not just be on. You can possibly just have lights that sense, so that when somebody gets into the data center, that way you get some lights. Else, it will just be left as is. The other point is also around power optimization. Most of the equipment, they've got a power rating to say maybe it ranges from, let's say, 18 to 27. In most instances, people would want to ensure that you operate at 18. What that is effectively means is that you need more requirements, more power requirements, as opposed to stretches possibly to 25. So if we adhere to the manufacturer of the equipment power ratings, that will contribute to energy savings. In terms of the power solutions, you can also have a hybrid kind of a power provisioning. You can decide to go green. You can start with your solar, then maybe to your batteries, to your commercial power, and lastly maybe your gensets, because that's the most expensive power source. The last point is around the maintenance and the operations of the data centers. Also coupled with that are the monitoring tools, so that you don't react to equipment that is already fault, because there will be a lot of inefficiencies around that. From my colleagues, if I have left anything else, you can possibly also help me.
It's an excellent presentation. All right. Does the next group want to present quickly, and then we can discuss all at once?
Okay. Okay, I think the issue of power is one of the most delicate issues. I remember back, there was a joke that was circulating on app, and the Maroy Rata ita wajga Maria Magetz, what if you kajga inyika yes? Okay, I'm gonna say the last presenter basically presented on much of the points that we have, but in our presentation we have managed to just reduce that to maybe a more simplified version of it from a non-technical perspective. So the first one, the issue of power, goes the issue of our strategy in terms of hardware acquisition. Because in as much as you want to build a data center, in as much as the business has got its goals and objectives, they will probably prefer to have, high computing power. But along those lines, we also need to put into consideration the issue of power. So right from the word go, from the strategy, what is it that we want to achieve? What hardware that we need? We need to put power considerations from the word go. Then the next thing is on design and deployment. The way traditional data centers used to be deployed, I think, as the last speaker is alluded, we used to have this kind of room, then we have an aircon, and it's just flooding cold air within the data center. But then the contemporary or modern data centers, they've tried to optimize, to optimize the cooling processes, probably by having some kind of cold aisle, the hot aisle kind of setup, which is actually one of the ways of optimizing the data center. Then in terms of running the data center, we also have the issue of ensuring that probably we don't need the lights during the day. We need to have things like, motion sensors to ensure that when there's nobody in the data center, probably the lights are switched off and we are saving somehow. Then you also have the issue, excuse me. You also have the issue of the skill set. I think this is one of the universal thing that has been featuring probably in most of the presentation. The skill set that we need is very important, because if we don't have the right skill set, then it goes back to the issue of how are we going to operate our equipment. So in as much as our equipment is not properly operated, is not properly set up, then definitely we're going to have maybe more power consumption that we need, because somebody just made a simple configuration error in the power setup. So we really need a solid skill set. Then also we have the issue of cooling technologies. From a data center perspective, in as much as we consider the hardware that we need in the data center in terms of computing power, we also need to put into consideration that probably the most power consumption in the data center is the cooling infrastructure. So in as much as you want to build our data center, the cooling part has to be put into consideration. and we need to ensure that we put cooling technologies. Probably we need some kind of management softwares that help us determine maybe where are we having more heat, where are we consuming more power, and probably along the lines we ensure that we optimize our cooling systems within the data center. Then we also have maybe some kind of housekeeping issues within the data center. So in as much as we operate in the data center, the way we consume our power, when we have some kind of software that help us to manage the data center, it helps maybe predict our future consumption of power, and maybe along the lines, it's go back to the issue of reporting back to the board or the executive, and along those lines, we try to optimize the data center. Then probably there's also the issue of green technologies. We need to consider alternative power sources, solars, probably the batteries and the UPS. And along those lines, I think we'll try to ensure that power is optimally consumed within the data center. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. Do we have any comments, reactions, questions, additions? None. Yes, there's a hand over there.
Okay, my contribution is going to be very short. Currently, you find that the data center consumes a lot of power in terms of cooling and the equipment. But naturally, we understand that the data center is full of maybe pieces of metal and semiconductors, which are basically useless if we don't have power. So power is an essential component. But nevertheless, it's also a high OPEX driver. So for us to be able to reduce that OPEX, we need to be diligent in terms of our engineering prowess. And for Zimbabwe in particular, we find that the commercial utility provides the least cost in terms of power. Should we go to the other sources of power like the generator and even the wind-driven generators, the diesel-driven generators, they are a little bit more costly. So our first port of call is on the ZESA supply, which is basically about 14 cents per kilowatt hour. And in view of that, I think the industrialists have got an opportunity for investment. For example, Zimbabwe is endowed with a lot of potential, say in the solar arena. We have got in the tropics, I think the highest sun hours. And that is green energy, which is also very good in terms of marketing our country. So should we have players coming forth into the generation of solar electricity, that is going to help us quite a lot. Then in terms of the service providers who have got data centers, they can also have solar arrays, say, on top of the roofs of their buildings, which is going to be quite handy. I think that is my contribution for now.
Thank you so much. Any other insights? Stoney?
I wanted to just ask a question, and maybe I missed it. Did we talk about as a way to save on power? Because, sorry? Okay, so I'm talking about if we have 10 companies, each one has got their own data center, and if we're able to consolidate into one data center, then there's the saving that comes along with that. Okay, wonderful, thanks.
Yes? Tendo Power.
Okay, in terms of cooling technologies, is now a huge push towards free cooling. There are now technologies that are available where you make use of the ambient temperature to be able to cool the data center rather than use direct expansion or chilled water powered cooling plants. And for our geographical location, if sufficient modifications are made, we could actually use significant savings in that respect.
Okay. All right. That. Any final thoughts before I close the session and hand over to the chairman? Okay. All right. I'd like to call upon Mr. Derera to come and address us in closing.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It has been a long journey. Thank God. On behalf of DCA and sponsors of this conference, it is indeed my pleasure to make a few closing remarks and express my gratitude to all those who made this event a reality. My heart is full as we come to the close of this conference. We have been richly taught, edified, as we have listened to the messages which has been presented and the testimonies which have been born. We express thanks to each of us who have been taking part in the participation of this conference. However, the planning of this conference was initiated in Monaco last year, in June. And the planning of a conference was paved with difficulties, because when you are planning a conference like this from a distance whereby you have to fly 10 hours to the venue of the conference and 1.5 hours to the sponsors, the only way that conference can become a success is only when participants arrive. They are the lifeblood of a conference. In that regard, I would want to express my sincerely thanks to all of you who have come to be with us. We do thank you for being interested in DCA. It is my sincere duty to thank all of you who have been here today. Please, your contribution is very, very immense, and I would urge you to take this opportunity and also to take back to your environment what you've learned and try to implement it so that our industry can be better. I don't know, maybe some people might think that DCA it's a to do with trying to force management to change things which they are used to. That's not the case. DCA is a learning platform, and we want also managers to learn so that they can accept new technologies and improve what we are living in. In that note, because we are all tired, I want to say, and we are going to meet again in February next year. You're coming February, yeah?
In other words, we are free to go and be merry.
Thank you, Mr. Ngali. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Mlambo. Our journalist.